Alright, so this video is for the seated occiput for left rotation restriction. First things first, I'm going to assess. So I'm going to have one finger on the occiput, the second finger on the lateral mass of C1. I'm just going to rotate the patient's head, and I'm feeling for my finger on the occiput to push further than the one on the lateral mass. Same thing on this side, one finger on the occiput, other one on the lateral mass of C1. Okay, and the rotation's on this side. So to set it up, I'm gonna have to have the patient in my strike zone. So could you go scoot down a bit lower? Perfect. MCP contact on the patient's occiput. Indifferent hand is gonna contact the patient obliquely, and you can just relax into my hand. There you go. And rotate. And line of drive is gonna be P to A. So this is the TMJ supine long axis adjustment. So first thing I'm going to do is assess. So my fingers are just by the ramus of the jaw. And patient, please open your mouth and close your mouth. Okay, both felt equal, but for demonstration purposes, we're going to say the left side had the restriction. So I'm going to have the left side up. So my indifferent hand is going to contact the bottom of the patient's head. It's going to help laterally flex. And my contact hand, piezoform contact, is going to be on the ramus of the jaw, just like this. And line of drive is just going to be in line with the patient's face. Alright, so this is the T1 seated right lateral flexion restriction demonstration video. So first thing I'm going to do is assess. I'm going to take my metacarpal contact right over the rib and the T1 TP. So laterally flex, I should feel it sink, and then let it flex away and it should rise. So it fails to sink, so there's a right lateral flexion restriction. To set up the adjustment, you have the patient's arms just over here, and same contact right here. My indifferent hand is gonna laterally flex the patient's head, and my contact hand line of drive is gonna be S to I, L to M, and my indifferent hand is just gonna traction upwards. Alright, so this is the T6 prone adjustment. First thing I'm going to do is assess. So patient, cross your arms please. Okay, so I'm on T6, rotating. And there's a restriction on this side, so right rotation restriction. And then stay like that. I'm going to laterally flex. And pushing on the spinous, and there's a right lateral flexion restriction there. So I'm going to have you lay on your front. Use my right hand on T6. So my piezoform on the TP, fingers are crossing the spine. I'm gonna have clockwise torque. So patient, take a deep breath in and out, and bam. Line of drive is gonna be P to A. So this is the seated radial head adjustment. First thing we're gonna do is assess. So the thumb's gonna be on the radial head. So on pronation, I'm gonna push, and on supination, I'm gonna push. So it was restricted in pronation, so we're gonna have the patient's hand pronated. I'm going to be standing behind the patient, and line of drive is just going to be P to A on that radial head. Alright, so this is the supine glenohumeral internal rotation restriction stretch adjustment. It's a mouthful. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is assess. So externally rotate, internally rotate. Okay, so the restriction is upon internal rotation. So we're going to put his arm on my thigh, and we're going to internally rotate here. So get to the end of the stretch and impulse, and then one more time, end of the stretch and impulse. And we're going to do it 3 times total. After it's done, we're going to reevaluate. And so external rotation and his internal rotation should be better. Alright, so this is the seated carpal proximal row adjustment. So first thing I'm going to do is assess. I'm going to have my fingers just on the proximal row. I'm going to put it into extension. I'm going to put it into flexion, and there's a flexion restriction. So for the adjustment itself, same setup. Patient, lean back please. Okay, tightening that rope, and then I'm going to do a quick impulse. Right. So this is the seated to supine TL junction adjustment. So first I'm going to assess. Patient, cross your arms. Awesome. And he's going to extend. And for demonstration purposes, we're going to say T12 fails to extend. So patient's arms are already crossed. Patient, take a deep breath in for me. And now, and line of drive is just A to P. Alright, so this is the supine hip internal rotation restriction video. First thing we're going to do is assess. So internal rotation, we're gonna do this. And then for external rotation of the hip, we're gonna do this. So the restriction was with internal rotation. So to set up the adjustment, I'm gonna wax on. So it's like this internal rotation, and pull and impulse. All right, so this is the supine A to P restriction of the fibular head adjustment. First thing I'm gonna do is just assess. So I'm on the fibular head, pushing A to P, and I'm pushing P to A. And so when I'm pushing A to P, there's a restriction there. So to address this, I have one thumb on it. It's a covered thumb adjustment, so my other thumb right over. And line of drive is just gonna be straight A to P. All right, so this is the first metatarsal corkscrew adjustment. So I'm on the patient's big toe. This hand, I'm just gonna stabilize the base. And then with this pincer grip, I'm just going to put it through the ranges of motion. So internal rotation, external rotation, M to L, L to M, and then dorsal to plantar, and plantar to dorsal. And so for demonstration purposes, let's say if it has an internal restriction, so internal rotation restriction, so it internally rotate and impulse and so forth.